Charlie's having me lick the toe of Satan.
Having you what?
Lick the toe of Satan.
It's a very hot candy.
For a video.
Hello and welcome to Hot FUNC. I'm your host, Charlie Lott. With us today is Furman Jr. Price St. Clair. Price is a writer and podcaster with the Paladin newspaper, among other things on campus, where he mostly focuses his writing and podcasting on the realm of political science. Price, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Happy to be here, Charlie. Thanks.
I feel like for a lot of people, today's political landscape is pretty, it's downright nasty to a lot of people's opinions. So what is it that attracts you to studying and talking about politics? Why did you make it sort of the focal point of both your time at Furman and also the various things you've done with the Paladin? And we'll each lick this before you do that.
Okay, toe of Satan, here we go. So the lick isn't bad, then you can really start to feel the aftertaste there.
It's a lot.
Whew. Let me grab a... Oh man!
picks
It's the after effect.
It picks
Okay. So I didn't realize how much of a challenge it was gonna be to think on my feet with the hot stuff in my mouth. So a few things. Number one, just in terms of why I decided to study political science and why I think it's interesting. I guess I'll frame it as I think politics is both interesting and important. It's important in the sense that, the decisions about policy that are made in the political world affect people's lives. Some less directly than others. I think people today pay a lot of attention to national politics, and there are a lot of good reasons for that. But at the same time, a few weeks ago, I interviewed Knox White, who's the mayor of Greenville. They're working on this 60-acre Unity Park that's going to open in the spring of 2022. And it's in a neighborhood that used to be a segregated area, and there's going to be some affordable housing set aside for people to live there. So that's transformative for the city of Greenville. And because we're a democracy, electoral politics is a part of that. So, regardless of whether people find politics distasteful, and I'm sympathetic to people who feel that way, we should all sort of care about what the results are. And then in terms of political science being a social science, even the things that we do find distasteful can sort of be revealing about what do people believe, how do they choose to act on those beliefs and behave in the world. So that's why I think it's interesting to study. I've sort of been interested in it since I was a kid. I memorized a list of the presidents when I was a kid. And then, in terms of how that applies to Furman, like I was sort of alluding to earlier, I think national politics is important. I think about it a lot in the classes that I take. It's something I would think about covering and writing about in the future of my career, potentially. But Jessica Taylor, another Furman grad, who's a political journalist that I interviewed recently, one of her big things is to be a good journalist, you need to be able to cover where you are. And so, as the opinions editor at the Paladin and the Red, White, Blue, and Purple podcast, what I try to do is have coverage focused on Furman. That doesn't mean it has to be non-political coverage, but it needs to tie back to how do these things affect the Furman community. So I argued in a piece that went up yesterday, other schools similar in size to Furman that are private liberal arts schools have done these vaccine clinics where all their students can receive the one-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine before the end of the semester. I think we should do something similar. I've been supportive of the administration on some things related to COVID, critical on other things. And same thing with sort of campus culture and politics. So it's an interesting time to be a student at Furman, interesting time, and sometimes a depressing time to be paying attention to American politics. I'm rambling on here now, but that's a broad overview.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the Red, White, Blue, and Purple podcast during that answer. And I wanted to, just for our viewers who haven't listened to it yet, what kinds of topics do you cover? What kinds of guests do you have on? What's sort of your goal for each episode? What comes away from sort of the viewer experience with your podcast?
Okay. coming. Okay. So, yeah, the Red, White, Blue, and Purple podcast. I was originally thinking about just doing a newsletter and interviewing people for it, and then I realized you may as well just record the interviews, make it a podcast. So it's been an interesting experience. Sort of along the lines of what I was talking about before, I wanted to cover politics and policy, but from a Furman perspective. So we've had a wide variety of guests and sort of how the interviews go and what the topics are. You know, I want to sort of tailor that to each episode and who the guest is. But either the subject matter or the guest, I want to have some connection to Furman. So, because COVID has sort of been the most important thing happening in the world in the last year. I talked to a Furman alum, Kate Cowsey, who's a public health researcher. I talked to elected officials on the state, local, and national level. So Chandra Dillard, who actually works at Furman as the community relations director, is in the State House of Representatives. Like I said, I talked to Mayor White. I interviewed David Trone, who Furman students will know from the Trone Student Center. So anyway, so David Trone is a member of the House of Representatives, in Washington, D.C. So I talked to him. I want this to be a educational, informative, and also enjoyable experience for Furman students. And I've definitely, personally had to, improve as an interviewer. I've learned a lot over the course of doing the 6 or 7 episodes we've done so far. But I want it to be relevant for Furman students, so we just did one about SGA and talked to Griffin Mills, the current SGA president, and Asha Marie, who's the incoming SGA president. Toe of Satan. Yeah, so, hoping to build readership, and I would encourage anyone watching this to check out the podcast, and if you have feedback, whether positive or negative, please let me know, because I want this to be something that serves the Furman community. And hopefully something, I haven't fleshed this out yet, I'm currently a junior, I'll be a senior next year, but something that sort of will be ongoing after I leave Furman, just sort of as an aspect of the Paladins coverage. I think having a podcast that does thoughtful interviews around politics is important. So,
Bryce, you also run I don't know if you're co-captain or president of the club running team.
Yeah.
On Furman's campus. Could you talk a little bit about how specifically running, but more generally athletics and club athletics has been a part of your Furman experience, and how it sort of contributes to the other things, whether it's political science or just your academics in general on campus?
Absolutely.
Cheers.
Trying to do what you did last time, keep my tongue. So, yeah, I'm the... It's an interesting experience. So I'm the president of the running club. We haven't been able to do as much this year as I would have liked, because Furman's not letting any of the club sports teams compete. Due to COVID, obviously. So I ran track and cross country competitively in high school, and came to Furman. And I'm personally just sort of in this weird position that I and some friends of mine who are sort of similar at other schools like to call the JV elite, and that we're not as fast as like the Cameron Ponders of the world, of the Furman varsity team, but faster than everybody else. We still like to compete some. So that was why I originally sort of got involved. I enjoy running, and sort of to your point of how it's impacted my life sort of at Furman and also before Furman is, I don't know, just sort of the habit of running. It's good. I'm just the kind of person, I like rhythm and routine, and having running, or if not running, I also like to ride my bike. Like having something like that be a part of my day-to-day rhythm is, I think, healthy, not only physically, but also just sort of, keeps you in a good place mentally. And, produces discipline, gives you sort of like that's a good framework, I think, for looking at things. Not discipline in like a punishing way, but if you run a lot, you know, over time you take hundreds of thousands, millions of steps, like your body is sort of etched by that. And I think the same thing is true, like mentally and spiritually, like dedicating yourself to schoolwork doesn't mean that every day of school has to be like this heroic, like difficult thing, but just chipping away over time, you'll improve and see results. So, yeah, I'm hoping senior year the running club can get back to like being more fully engaged in the activities we've done. I mean, people in the club have been doing some races, sort of like Furman's fine with people racing, they're just not going to pay for it. So hopefully next year they'll pay for it and more people get involved, because I know there are a lot of people who run at Furman. And yes, so if you're watching this and you're a runner and you're not part of the running club, we'd love for you to be a part of it. It's pretty informal, various sort of levels of commitment. A few different groups sort of have set times that they meet to run. Just have, fun social runs together, and just sometimes it's easier to run with other people than to run by yourself. And then we also do races and sometimes some other fun club activities. Club sport, I would love to see club sports and or intramural sports sort of have a bit of a comeback. I'm not saying they're like in the dump or anything, but this is something a lot of students would enjoy, and just because people are busy, don't take the time to do it. And it's not that sports are for everyone, but it's a great way to blow off steam and enjoy being with other people. So,
I did a little bit of LinkedIn stalking to dig up this question, and I noticed that you've been doing, I think you had 2 different sort of research projects within the political science department. And I feel like for a lot of Furman students, when there's a chemistry major or a biology major that's doing research, you're like, oh, I intuitively know what that looks like.
Yeah.
They're going to a stream and collecting samples, or they're mixing things in vials. And for a lot of the social sciences, like political science, that can look completely different. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about specifically what your research looks like, what you're looking to uncover, and just day to day what it looks like being a researcher of political science.
Yeah. Okay, cheers. Number one, glad to meet a fellow LinkedIn stalker. Like I was talking about earlier, I think political science is interesting and important, and so I also enjoyed statistics in high school. I'm not a math guy to the extent like your math majors or math people, but I thought statistics was applicable, and I sort of had similar thoughts when I took political analysis, which is the sort of research methods, pseudo-statistics class for the political science major. And I was sort of looking for more ways to continue to do some of that stuff. So when we're thinking about political science research, social science research, and what it looks like, there are a few different ways you could gather data. You could do something more qualitative. I'm taking an American presidency class right now. I think most people in the class, it'll be sort of a qualitative research project where you go find transcripts of interviews that presidents have done, sort of compare how did Barack Obama engage with Fox News versus how did George W. Bush do it versus how did Trump do it, because that was very sort of distinct and different. That's one way. The other way is quantitative, where you can actually gather data that becomes numerical. So one project I was involved in with Dr. David Fleming was not the sexiest of topics. Basically, every year when political science majors take political analysis, they present their usually quantitative research projects to, research presentations are pretty normal, but at Furman, the audience is typically folks from the Woodlands and folks from Ollie, so got a mixed crowd of students and also senior citizens. And so we were curious what students thought about that, if that had changed their perspective. Yes, sorry, I'm still dealing with the hotness. And so like sort of our process for researching that, and I can't give you, unfortunately, for this like as clear a singular takeaway, because we had to change our strategy due to COVID, and there's some projects that just you don't have like a awesome finding you can sort of spin. But this was able to be presented at the American Political Science Association conference, which was cool. So Dr. Fleming and I worked together on designing a survey. So this survey went out to all the political science majors, and then we had a separate survey, or sort of a subset of that survey, that was specifically for people taking the political analysis class that semester, which was spring of 2020, compared with all the other political science majors. So we started out doing sort of a broad literature review, see what else people have written about sort of this topic of teaching research methods and that kind of stuff, and how they study it. And then we were trying to write survey questions tailored to the concepts we were trying to measure. And then when we eventually had data, which wasn't initially because of not having that presentation occur, we were hoping to do sort of pre-post and to survey some of the Ali people at the event. We weren't able to do that. This is a longer answer than you bargained for. Once we had that, Dr. Fleming, since he's more of the expert, did more of the like statistical wrangling with the data. But I had also helped do the literature review, and then I actually helped write the paper. Like I would say, we both contributed written content to the paper, which, introduction, literature review, analyzing the data, sort of what our conclusions were. So in some ways, it's a pretty similar process to how the hard sciences do research. It's just messier, because instead of being like, okay, we need to get 900 milliliters of this solution and mix it with this other solution, or see how it affects the gills of such and such a fish, we're thinking about, okay, confidence in public speaking, confidence in or experience being in a learning environment with people from different backgrounds, whether it be political, racial, gender, or age. That was something we were interested in because of the Ali component. So this is the concept we want to measure, which is a real thing, but you can't like measure in a vial. So how do we design a survey question to figure that out? And then, actually, the more intensive research experience I've been a part of is I did research with Dr. James Guth this summer, and I was mostly working on collecting data that can later be analyzed. So we were looking at members of Congress and their religious beliefs, belonging, and behavior, sort of three different aspects that political scientists use to look at religion. So I was sort of scouring the internet for all these members of Congress from like 2011, trying to find those things that then can be turned into a numerical scale and then crunch the numbers. So
this is a question that we've asked all of our guests since COVID started, who have been on the show. What's one takeaway specifically from your experience with COVID at Furman, that you feel like is going to continue, either just day to day as a student or in your various leadership roles on campus? What's something that, like a positive, that you think you're going to bring out of it and maintain the same moving forward?
Cheers. Okay. This is an interesting question, because there are small things and big things, and there's some things that I think are going to stay, that I want to stay, and there are other things that I really want to change. In terms of small things, like, I think swiping in on your phone into the DH rather than using your card, they will keep that, and they should keep that. It's a little more efficient. I hope they can sort of finagle some bugs out of that app, but I think that's great. I think more broadly, this goes back to some of what I was talking about earlier, just with the running club and stuff. My hope is, we can think about COVID as an accelerator of existing trends, but also as a disruptor of trends. And so I hope for student organizations, and this has been true at the Paladin, not as much in the running club just because we've been prevented from doing stuff, but it's been true at the Paladin, I think, with other student groups and just in students' social lives in general, that people will, like, the restrictions from COVID have distilled those things down to their essence and sort of stripped away a lot of the sort of extra social wrappings that things come in. And on one level, that's been really bad, and I'm really ready for it to be over, because one of the things you love about Furman is, like, just sort of the casual happenstance interactions with people in the dining hall or in the library or walking to and from class. And even though we've been lucky to be in person here, a lot of us, there's just been less of that. So I want a lot of that to come back. But I have a sense that, a lot of students are sort of overextended, and they do things, and they're engaged in activities that they, just because they sort of feel like they should be doing it, as opposed to, this is something I really care about. And I'm not at all trying to diss any particular group or anything. I see this in myself, and I see it in my friends. It's a good problem to have, I think, because there are so many good things going on at Furman that people really want to be a part of. But sometimes it's better to be, like, really a part of a few important things rather than, like, a ton of things that you can only give so much to. And, like, I don't know as much about funk as some people, but I think funk is a good example of, didn't you start it?
I did.
Yeah, like, so you and other people sort of had this vision of a need that could be met, or an idea that could come to fruition that could actually, would be fun for you, provide an interesting experience, and also be valuable to other students. So, you can tell me, but I'm assuming that's taken a lot of effort to build, to do something like this. Come up with the thoughtful interview questions, recruit other people to be a part of it. But I think out of necessity, people have just been less connected with each other than they usually are. I've definitely felt that, but it's also, I don't want to sound at all insensitive to the terrible things that have happened during this pandemic. If COVID hadn't happened, I wouldn't have gotten to be as involved with the Paladin as I have been, and that's ended up being, one of my top extracurricular experiences at Furman. And just on a practical level, like, we went from having a paper product that came out every 2 weeks to, okay, now we can sort of be online all the time. And there's some sense of loss there, and there's a chance in the future we bring back some kind of paper product, but it's been expansive. So that's been something I've been really excited about. And so I'm really looking forward to what I honestly think, and I know some people are more pessimistic, and I was a real sort of pessimist on this, but I've become more optimistic with the vaccine. I think we'll have a normal, maskless fall semester here. I'm really looking forward to things sort of being back to normal, but I hope people will sort of learn lessons from the pandemic of when we were in that space where social life looked a lot different, organizational life looked a lot different. What did we learn? What was most important, and how can we pursue those things?
If you could have any person, living or dead, on your podcast, who would you pick and why?
Okay. Oh, any person, living or dead. This has gotten better. The Tove Satan's gotten less destructive and less fiery as we've gone along.
You've gotten used to it. Yeah. Come to embrace it. Hell, you might take it home. I mean.
It's a tough question because it would be easy for the answer to be like, President Obama or something. But, and like, don't get me wrong, I'd love to love to interview President Obama, but like that's not Furman specific. Maybe I'll come up with a better answer later, but this is what I'm going to give you. Podcast aside, I've thought about this. So my name is Price, like The Price is Right. I'm named after my great-grandparents whose last name was Price. And I grew up before they passed away when I was sort of in middle school, going over their house, on a fairly regular basis. They didn't live too far away from my family. And my great-grandfather sort of educated as an engineer, but then he was a Southern Baptist pastor for like 40 plus years. And, a wise and thoughtful person. But as I've gotten older, there are questions I wish I had asked him while he was still alive. And I think a lot of those questions would be relevant to Furman. I think partly just our school's history is a Baptist institution. Like my great aunt came here, in the 1970s, was a student here. There are particularly things about, like my great grandfather I know was like a lifelong learner, but I'd like to hear sort of his view as someone who lived a long time of the things that have changed in our world, particularly in the Southeast, particularly among, religious people and institutions. So what was it like for him being a white pastor in Greensboro, sort of in the era of civil rights? What was the experience like, and then what would he have done differently, looking back on it, like as an old man? And I'm not saying like he was a racist or something. I don't know what the experience was like, other than he was a white pastor of a white church who really cared about the gospel and cared about his job and leading people in that way. So, and similarly from a political perspective, just this is a interesting sort of anecdote. When my great-grandfather Chief was a little kid, he saw electric lights installed for the first time at the North Carolina State Capitol in Raleigh. This was in 1929, sort of right before the stock market crash and the Great Depression began. And actually, Franklin Roosevelt was there in North Carolina when those lights were installed. But, that was, what is that? 82 years ago now. And like FDR was the up and coming Democrat of the time. Our party, he was not like a political scientist or anything, but he surely saw the parties change, states added to the Union, that kind of thing. And since I'm interested in that kind of stuff, I think it would be cool. So yeah, I don't, like Teddy Roosevelt's one of my favorite presidents. Like that's another good answer. Past Furman leaders. But I feel like since you asked the question living or dead, I should choose someone who's dead. So the first one that came to mind that I've sort of always thought about, not directly in relation to this podcast, is my great-grandfather. So that would be the answer that I'll give you for now.
For our last question, just plug whatever it is you need to plug, man. You could go through the running club again, your podcast, how people can find it, how they can get involved. Just anything you want people that watch this video to go check out.
Yes. Okay.
As your reward for making it through the 7 licks of the toe of Satan.
So I would be remiss if I didn't start with the Paladin is doing something new this semester, and it may continue to evolve. but it's called Paladin Plus. And it's like premium content in addition to what we do on the website. It's free for students. It's free for everybody currently. And sometimes what's on there is also published on the website, but we want students to be able to access that stuff. What's been produced so far has honestly been pretty cool. So I would really encourage people to check it out. So just to give some examples, so my podcast is one of those things. But there's a deep dive that I think comes out once a month that is sort of more investigative and sometimes analytical reporting. So one of our editors, Scotty Bryan, just put out the deep dive this past week, and I think it's going to be published as a piece on the website as well, looking at the socioeconomic breakdown of firm and student body based on data that this Harvard research group put together and that the New York Times reported about a few years ago. She sort of stumbled across it and decided to dig a little bit deeper. So, and it was surprising to me, actually, even compared to other private liberal arts schools, Furman has a lot of students, not a majority, but relatively speaking, a lot of students in the top 1% of the income distribution, and not as much in the bottom 20%, even compared to schools that are sort of similar to us. So, that's really important journalistic work that the Paladin's trying to do, and that's a part of that. George King did people are sports fans. Jay Billis does the 94 feet with basketball players. George King did something similar with Alex Hunter recently for the sports roundup that he does. And then the Sunday Summary, which Evan Myers, who's the editor-in-chief emeritus, has been doing, but that's going to continue to be sort of the editor-in-chief's newsletter that will be once a week, sort of summarizing and providing people links to what the most important stuff the Paladin is doing. So Lauren Kratz is going to take that over soon. So, we don't want to spam people. These emails and articles and podcasts are going to be thoughtfully put together and produced. So people should go on there and put in either their Furman email or their personal email, and then when a new episode of Red, White, Blue, and Purple comes out, they'll get an email. I mean, they can also look at it on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, but they'll get an email sort of saying, hey, this is what the episode was, and potentially also here's some resources, recommendations from the guest. I might have some extended thoughts after the fact on the interview that'll be in there, that kind of thing. So that's my number one recommendation, is sign up for all the Paladin Plus emails. Yeah, and if you're a runner, and you may not think you're a runner, but if you run at all for exercise, you're really a runner. Get involved with the running club. Yeah, and please provide. I, as a writer and as a podcast interviewer person, would love to hear feedback from people and build our listener base, but not just selfishly for me, so I can say a ton of people listen to our podcast, but because we want to actually provide service to the Furman community through it. So I think that's all I'm going to plug. There you go. And thanks for having me on, Charlie. I really appreciate it.
Well done. Congratulations, you've made it through.
Okay. Awesome.
Thank you for agreeing to be a part of it.
I'm going to leave the toe of Satan with you, but that was an interesting experience. I'm glad we did it.
I would leave it with you if I could, but my trash can's closer, so I'll hang on to it.
Okay.